Hello and welcome to the Compassionate Men's interview series. Today I'm thrilled to be talking to Father Richard Rohr. Father Richard Rohr is a Franciscan priest of the New Mexico province and founder of the Center for Action and Contemplation. He has authored more than 30 books including Falling Upward, Immortal Diamond, and From Wild Man to Wise Man. He also serves as academic dean of the Living School for Action and Contemplation. Welcome, Father Richard, and thank you for joining us today.
Well, it's wonderful to be with you. Thank you. I hope we can say some things that are worth your while. I'll try.
Oh, judging on my research, you have so much worthwhile to say, and I'm just so happy that you agreed to this interview.
You're kind. Thank you, though. Go right ahead.
Okay, so my first question is, one of the practices I notice on the Center for Action and Contemplation website is, quote, radical compassion, unquote. What is radical compassion, and where were you introduced to this practice?
Well, I'm not sure I'm completely equipped to talk about it because I'm still a learner, too. But for me, it's more changing the seer. If you see things in their fullness, in their truth, then the flow of compassion can follow rather easily. In other words, it's not just a matter of willpower. I'm going to be compassionate today. It doesn't work if your seeing is off. In other words, if you, first of all, see how people are different, or they're not like me, or they don't deserve my love, or they're a different race or a different religion. If you start with that kind of no inside of your psyche, that kind of resistance, radical compassion, even basic compassion, it can't happen. So that's the teaching of contemplation, where you teach the very way the mind works and the way it processes its information. And I'd like to say that all of the world religions discovered this at the higher levels, that you needed to change the mind, the way it operates. And I'm convinced that that was originally what we meant by the word prayer. But the word prayer has been so trivialized by making announcements to God or asking God for things, but it wasn't really giving you an alternative consciousness. And so that's why a lot of us use the word contemplation, to say we're talking about something a little deeper and bigger and broader than just saying prayers. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Especially makes sense to me in the light of your last Huffington Post article, where you said that, meditation, a daily meditation, is the way to achieve that, to get past that mammalian brain, that reptilian brain that causes us to just react rather than to act out of our own volition, act out of our free will.
Excellent. And it's so obvious once you see it that the brain you and I all operate with, if we don't find the alternative consciousness, is a rather reactive, egocentric, self-referential commentary on just about everything. And what the great spiritual masters discovered is that mind can't get you there. It's too self-referential. It's all about me at that point, you see. So if you prefer the word meditation, I don't care what word you use, but somehow you've got to change the way you process the moment.
Yeah. I mean, that's exactly the kind of practices that I'm kind of trying to teach in my coaching practice, and it fits perfectly in with the spirituality that I believe in and that I think you believe in as well. I have a question that's specifically from one of your books, Falling Upward, which I found to be one of the most clear maps of what we are here for, Father Richard. I mean,
thank you.
It was a beautiful read. But in one of the chapters, you named the chapter "Necessary Suffering," and I love that phrase. You also state that, quote, before the truth sets you free, it tends to make you miserable, unquote. And I love that too. And I wanted to ask you, in modern Western society, we have pharmaceuticals, we have this instant gratification culture, and we have all these media distractions that tends to hide suffering from us. And I was wondering, is this a factor in our inability to advance to what you call the second half of life? And if so, what can we do to change this trend?
Well, you're focusing right in on much of the core of the problem, that we confuse stimulation with experience. And in fact, the excess of stimulation that almost all of us are receiving now, even though I admit it's very helpful on some levels, is probably making contemplation more necessary, more important than ever. Because the mind is operating like a strobe light. And I see this as a teacher with people in front of me, and not just young people either. It's like we all just need something new, something different, something more extravagant, something outrageous, something. You can see this in the news, how the news has become the creating of entertainments, really. What will keep the people watching? And all of this is making the true contemplative mind very, very necessary, but also very, very difficult. So I guess to get back to your first phrase, necessary suffering, early stage meditation or contemplation is at this point a necessary suffering of choosing to understimulate yourself intentionally, so you can experience your experiences. So you don't think more is better. In fact, less is more in the spiritual life. I'm a Franciscan priest. And as you know, if you know anything about St. Francis, that was very much the heart of his whole life, that less is more. So in many ways, not just because of Pope Francis, but Francis himself, his teaching is coming very much to the fore today, it seems, as we realize that we're not enjoying our lives, and I think we're not enjoying them because we're not experiencing them at depth. And the joy is found in the depth of things, not more, but depth.
Those are wise words. I mean, coming from both you and St. Francis, right, or Pope Francis as well. I wanted to kind of delve deeper into that. I have a second question, Baron. So my question to you is, it's kind of complicated, but if the second half of life is finding out what is the content of our containers, technology can distract us from even looking for content or truth.
Yeah.
On the other hand, technology has powerful potential to make us realize what a lot of the great spiritual leaders talk about, that we're all united, that we are all one. So my question is, can we use technology to lead us into the second half of life? And if we can, do you have any suggestions on how?
Of course we can. I don't want to be a Luddite and pretend that everything invented and modern is dangerous. Well, it is dangerous, I guess, but it's not evil and it's not wrong. And someone who has their priorities in order. Now, it takes, frankly, much of your life to get your priorities in order for most of us. But you bring it back in as a tool, as a servant, as an instrument, but you can't let it lead the way. Do you understand? It has to follow your already chosen value system of what's important. And I think the most common example, you've heard it used too, is this experience we all have today in airports and airplanes and restaurants of people pretty much talking nonstop on phones. And forgive me, I don't mean this to sound judgmental, but from what you often hear, it's talking about nothing. It's just fillers, constant fillers. And you can't help but wonder, is this so the person can feel alive, like it's an artificial aliveness, where you have such quick, immediate access to so many friends and so many people, and you wonder if that isn't going to become a substitute for real intimacy or real encounter. That's my fear. But I do not want to say it's bad. I mean, what comes to mind in the moment, maybe you watched a few weeks ago the CNN Heroes of the Year, where, I was glued to the television for 2 hours watching these marvelous human beings who are doing things in all parts of the world that just make you want to cry. Talk about radical compassion. Now, I wouldn't have known about that, nor would a lot of other people know about that, without CNN, without a television set. And so it's good, Yeah, it's very hard for us to live inside of just one little nation anymore. Although Americans certainly try, which is the limitation of living in a country that is an empire. You can really tend to think you're the whole world. So I find that the globalization that technology is giving us has great potential for good.
Yeah, I love that, Father Richard, that you have to get your priorities set first, right? It's almost like you have to get into that second half of life before you become the slave to technology or the internet or Facebook.
When you're creating your container, I see that you picked up my vocabulary there, which is what you have to do. I mean, you're still a young man yourself, I think. So I'm in awe that you're asking these questions. But when you're first getting your education, making your marriage work, birthing your first children, and all the work that takes to raise them, you often, and this is not bad will, you don't have time to ask second half of life questions. What does it all mean? But if we don't raise up elders and father figures and mother figures who can guide us into the second half of life and say there's more than the container, you have to get to the contents, we're in trouble as a culture because, and I don't mean to be cruel or unfair, but we are very much a first half of life culture where most of our TV shows are aimed for teenagers.
And our whole culture prioritize youth, and it's almost like the elders are not only forgotten and not looked up to, but they're almost like hidden, right? We try to hide the elders, and I there's a chapter in From Wild Man to Wise Man about father hunger, and I think now more than ever, because of the internet, because of technology, we need those elders. We need those wise men. We need those father figures in the same way. And maybe you can tell the story about the African elephants, right? That.
You did read my book.
Yeah.
Now there's another thing that I saw on television. I'm sure some of your listeners or readers saw the same show. It was almost 5-6 years ago. But they discovered in a certain part of Africa that the young bull male elephants were out of control. They were doing things that aren't normal for elephant behavior. They were stomping on cars that came through the jungle. They were pushing over trees for no reason. They were attacking one another for no reason. And so they brought in scientists to observe them, and they said, what the problem is, all of the old male elephants had been poached or killed. So basically they said, what we have is teenage boys out of control. They don't know how to be a mature male because they've never seen a mature male. And so their testosterone, I guess they have testosterone too, I don't know, was out of control. It's just the young male without father figures, and I was a jail chaplain for 14 years here in New Mexico where I live. I mean, the only universal pattern I found in 14 years with men and women in jail is they did not have a good father. And so it's sort of aimless, goalless life where you just lash out in all directions, searching for power, searching for importance, searching for validation, because you never got that primal validation from your dad. It's a huge problem worldwide. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that kind of segues really nicely into the next question I wanted to ask you. And I know you're a big proponent of male initiation rituals, like men's rites of passage. And do you find that men who go through these initiation rituals become more compassionate? And if so, how do you think these rituals cultivate compassion in young men?
Well, I've been given retreats. Although now that I turned 70, I've stopped traveling and I just teach from here at home. But I gave retreats worldwide for 43, 44 years. And of all the retreat types that I gave, the ones that without any doubt seemed to change people, change men in particular, who don't change very easily, as you know, were what we call the men's rites of passage. Now that I don't give them anymore, there's groups that carry it on under the name Illuman, Illuman. You could look it up there and learn a little more about it. But all I did from 1991 till about 1995 was read everything I could cross-culturally about this rather universal phenomenon. It really was. And how could so many cultures come up with the same conclusion unless they were hearing something from what we would call the collective unconscious, or we Christians would call the Holy Spirit, that they came to such common recognitions that if the young male early in life, usually between 13 and 17, was not forced to go inside and to go deep, he wouldn't. He would spend, as we see in many of the males of the world, his whole life seeking sex, power, and money in very superficial ways, not meaningful ways, but superficial ways. In other words, the young male was perceived as a loose cannon, that he had to be taught. As Rogers and Hammerstein said, he had to be carefully taught. And that was initiation. Now, often they lasted 5 weeks or even 5 months. But I knew that I was no way going to be able to get men to do that. They have jobs, they have families, because I started giving them to middle-aged men. Usually the biggest impact was somewhere between 35 and 55, where it blew them out of the water. But I created a 5-day event. And for years I gave them up here at Ghost Ranch in New Mexico. But now they've moved to 13 different regions of the United States and the world. And, I can't reveal the whole thing. You got to go through it experientially. The book that comes the closest to telling you what we do is a book called Adam's Return. Adam's Return. I wrote it about 10 years ago. And there you'll get the core of the experience, described at least.
And I know that part of that process is becoming acquainted with powerlessness, right? Which you also equate with the first step of the 12-step program.
That's right. That's right.
And
they weren't wrong on that. I mean, as a Christian, that's what Jesus is saying too. He calls it the way of the cross. It's just different vocabulary. But until a person has encountered, faced, absorbed the teaching of their own powerlessness, they don't discover what real power is. That's what it comes down to. And the assumption in this universal phenomenon of male initiation rites was that if a man didn't walk through his own powerlessness, this is going to sound like a strong statement, but the assumption seemed to be most males would not know how to handle power. In fact, they would almost always abuse it, almost always. And boy, there's a lot of evidence that's true.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I mean, you just look at the political scene today, right? And you can see that those men didn't have a male initiation, right, Joel?
Yeah. Yeah, we should initiate our whole Congress in both parties, I think. And, we in the church have seen it too. And Pope Francis is now warning us against this, that even to become an ordained minister, he says, has become a career move. Not a following of the gospel or Jesus, but a career move. And he just lambasts this because, when even so-called holy things are used in a self-referential way, it absolutely distorts them, as we see. So it's not just government. I need to pick on the church, too. We've been part of the problem.
I love that about you, Father Richard. What do you say? You're at the edge of the inside, that you're inside, but you're constantly critiquing, and I think that's the markings of a prophet or a saint. That they're willing to look at what they're a part of and not just accept it. So.
Right. I call that the structurally prophetic position, on the edge of the inside. Once you're outside, you've lost the right to throw stones, But if you're too much at the center and you become a company man, that you've got to mouth all the platitudes of your corporation or organization, no wisdom ever comes from that position. It's too compromised. But if you can live, and this was what St. Francis taught us, on the edge of the inside of organized Christianity, there you have structural freedom to see things, to say things, to know things, to feel things that almost you can't do in any other way.
Yeah, that's.
Thanks for hearing that. Yeah.
That's great advice for anybody in
any
organization,
any corporation.
Right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question that it's one of the things that I'm really delving into in my meditation practice, and it has to do with non-duality. You ventured to say that compassion cannot even happen without non-duality thinking. Can you explain this intersection of compassion and non-duality, and how contemplative practices cultivate non-duality and therefore compassion?
You ask good questions, Kozo. Thank you. This is my book, The Naked Now, where I try to teach non-dual thinking. And you've made a wonderful linkage that really the dualistic mind, which is the low-level reptilian brain that sees everything in splits, either or, with me, against me, like me or threatening to me, my religion or not my religion, American or non-American. A lot of people never move beyond that, and they don't realize the narcissism that it reveals. So you're absolutely right. At that level, the most you can do, as Jesus puts it in one place, is love your neighbor but hate your enemy. People who are just like you, maybe you can possibly be nice to them. But even that, you can't stretch it very far, because the capacity for compassion is basically not there. You're too narcissistic. It's still all about you. So unless you've come to the beginnings of non-dual thinking, where you stop judging, labeling, separating, splitting, competing, you can't love anybody very deeply, I'm afraid. As soon as they're a threat to you or outside your group or outside your advantage, you can't do it. So does that make sense?
Yeah. And then I totally agree with you that you have to transcend that duality in order to have unconditional love, in order to have true compassion in order to be able to love thy enemy, as Jesus would say. But,
yeah, it really isn't possible. As long as you're in your split mind of comparing and competing. Women in general, this is a generalization, but women tend to compare, men tend to compete. They don't realize they're doing that. But once you stay at that level, you can't get very far.
And then, so I know you cover some of this, and I watched that whole, I think it was like a 2 hour, it was great. It was a 2 hour talk on silence, right? And I know you cover a little of this there, but so how does silence, or how does contemplative practice, or how does meditation get us into non-duality?
Yes. See, words are by necessity comparative. That's their function. They distinguish this from that. Now, I'm not against words. I use words in all my books too. And maybe it's because I've been a teacher and a writer so much of my life that I've also come to see the limitations of words. So there's not a religion in the world at the more mature levels that hasn't discovered the foundational discipline of silence, where you stop this manufacturing of words and ideas. Now, some can stop the words, but the ideas still keep rumbling through their head. So true silence is both inner and outer. And that's the real art form that, to be honest, we haven't seriously taught in Western Christianity for the last 500 years. Well, once we invented the printing press, once we became totally identified with proving this scripture right or that scripture wrong, it was the triumph of dualistic thinking. And then we added on to that with what we call the Enlightenment in the West, where it wasn't just thinking, but it was rational thinking, so-called. Logical thinking, so-called. It wasn't really as logical as it wanted to pretend it was. But at any rate, the earlier tradition you find in the Desert Fathers and Mothers, in the Sufis, in the mystics of all religions, of this spacious silence that just allows you to hold the whole picture, the whole event, the whole idea, without dividing the field of the moment. And, well, I like that part and I don't like that part. I agree with that and I don't agree with this. Over the years, being a public speaker, very often the first hand that's waving in the air when I open it up to question and answer, I always say, almost never want to call upon that person. It's always a dualistic question. Always. Their very egocentricity that wants to insist on being heard first. You understand? I would say, and I'm talking about 40 years on the road, that hand that's waving in the air is almost always egocentric. Forgive me, but it's true. It's they want to be heard. They want to be heard now. And they want to tell you why they don't agree with you and why what you said was incorrect. And they mean well. It's not their fault. No one ever taught them how to pray. Because when you pray, you wait, you listen, you allow, you forgive. You don't rush to judgment. First of all, they assume that they perfectly understood what you were trying to say. And half the time, I would say over half the time, I would have to say, now, brother, you did not really hear what I said. You jumped to conclusion what you feared I was saying. And your fear took over, and you had to prove me wrong, and I can take that. I'm used to it. But it isn't going to get you anywhere. That level of consciousness is not going to get you to... did you read the Naked Now book at all?
I'm sorry, that's one of the books I wasn't able to get, Father Richard.
Yeah, you don't need, so I'm not trying to push my books, but I just don't want to repeat too much. As I say in that book, and I'll stop at this, I said you hit a ceiling with your dualistic mind. Your dualistic mind is necessary to get you through the day, to turn left or right, to do those logical, common sense things that we all need to do. But you hit a ceiling, and above that ceiling, in the book, I say there are 5 big issues that the dualistic mind cannot process, cannot deal with. And this is what most people stumble on, and what turns most people sour, cynical, bitter, atheistic, or whatever. Love, death, suffering, any notion of infinity or eternity, and any honest notion of God. Those are the 5 big issues that your dualistic mind, it can't process it. You see, it's in a different field. Now, since I've written the book, The Naked Now, I've added a 6th, and it's sex. I do not think sexuality, the mystery of sexuality, can be dealt with creatively, lovingly, positively with the dualistic mind. And I think that's why we have a lot of poor sexual teaching. We tried to. We tried to say to young Catholic boys or young Protestant boys, don't do it, as if just don't do it was going to make it go away. You need to fall into a much bigger field to deal with the mystery of sexuality.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a whole nother
right there. Sorry I opened it up.
No.
But I did it because I wanted to affirm the importance and the necessity of dualistic thinking. Otherwise, people will think I'm naive or unreal or whatever. You have to first become competent at dualistic, logical, common sense, rational thinking. And then you see that it's not enough. It's not adequate to the task. That's all. Yeah.
I agree with you wholeheartedly, Father Richard. And one of the chapters in the book that I'm writing is called 2 + 3 = 1, right? And it's this idea that duality plus Trinity will bring us to a one that we're all one, and it follows the line. I kind of got it from your both and non-dualistic statement, right? That it's both and.
Yeah.
So it's actually the 2 becomes 3 becomes 1, and I think that's really key to all those things that you mentioned, right? To spirituality, to love, to sex, to
right.
I think happiness, right?
Right. I know you're from a partially Asian background, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was raised a Buddhist.
Yes. Well, see, it's very interesting to me that the Asian mind, 3 of the Eastern religions directly taught non-dualistic thinking. The Western mind had it in the early period of Christian history and then lost it as it became far too dualistic. So this reintroducing really from the other hemisphere, if I can call it that, not just the other hemisphere of the brain, but the other hemisphere of the planet. When I've taught non-dual thinking and I have Asian students in the class, they never fight me. They know it's true, as you seem to also. Yeah, they know it's true. But the Western dualistic mind, gosh, they're afraid they're going to lose their brains or something. When actually you're immensely expanding their brain capacity.
Yeah, when I read or I listen to your talks or read a lot of the things on non-duality, I just keep coming back to the yin-yang symbol, the black and the white. It's not just black and white, right? But in the white there's a little bit of black. In the black there's that little white in there. So, and there's that movement in it that it's spinning. It's constantly non-duality, right? And
that's right.
It makes sense to me that way. I want to pick up on. Oh, sorry. Did you want to comment on that?
On the Tao symbol?
Yeah.
Well, I would just agree with you. It's a perfect visual symbol, of what we're talking about. Yeah. For Christians, it was the cross and resurrection, which seem like total opposites: unjust death and glorious freedom. And how do you put those two together? But a lot of Christians never really got the point that was also teaching paradox. That's why something like the Tao graphic symbol makes it very clear if you look at it clearly.
Wow, that's perfect for my next question. So Father Rich, I want to do something with you here that I don't know. We'll just try it, okay? We'll just try it.
Okay. All right.
So I want to look at Christ, the life of Jesus, as the life of a meditator. And I know that in I forget where I read it, that you see the Lord's Prayer as Jesus conceding to the desire of his disciples to give them something to say, because everything prior to that was silent prayer, right? And
that's right.
And I know that you subscribe to the idea that Jesus was like a meditator, that he spent time in silence. Obviously, the 40 days and 40 nights was like a 40-day, 40-night retreat, right, in silence, in nature.
Right.
I want to push that to the crucifixion, and I want to look at the two statements on the cross. And the first, my God, why hast thou forsaken me, right? And what I see there is, although Jesus was obviously a very high consciousness throughout his life, that on the cross, at the moment on the cross, he displays this, what in Buddhism we call the three poisons: ignorance, aversion, and craving, right? So there's, by this my Father, or my God, there's this still ego going, right? My. And there's this ignorance of his true connection to God. Why hast thou forsaken me? Which is ignorant of that God never can and will or have the possibility of forsaking you. And then there's also this aversion to his present situation and craving for redemption, craving for relief, right? And then there's a switch, and I see this switch as a switch of enlightenment, where he then says, he doesn't say my God, he says, Father, forgive them, they know not what they do. And there I
Father,
see,
into your hands I commend my spirit, he says at the end.
Yeah. There I see,
that's right.
There I see enlightenment, right? There I see not only no aversion, no craving, but also, acceptance of as is, but also this unconditional love, this giving, this forgive them,
Sure.
and this awareness and wisdom and insight, and I'm wondering if you see a similar, and obviously there's a paradox there, right, with those two statements that show this non-dual nature, but I'm wondering if you see this similar movement, or what your views on Christ as a seeker of higher consciousness and the crucifixion being a point of enlightenment.
Sure. Let me say several things. I'll necessarily have to say them briefly, but first of all, you're correct that in Luke's gospel, it's very clear that teaching them a verbal prayer appears to be a concession, that they never had a verbal prayer. And if you count all the times Jesus goes off into the desert alone to pray, this, you've got to know, for a Jewish temple religion, where a prayer was done formally by the singing of psalms, the reciting of verses from the Jewish scriptures, this is not typical. We didn't realize he's talking about a different form of prayer. And it's not saying prayers. It's not reciting prayers. It's not verbal prayers. Now, then to go to the cross, as you said, just let me point out one thing that might be helpful to you. In at least one of the Gospels, I should count if it's more, the actual Aramaic words he used, Eloi, Eloi, he's calling Elohim, which was the acceptable spoken word for God. They could not use the sacred name Yahweh. So our translation, my God, putting that pronoun there that personalizes it, is not really legitimated from the Hebrew that were given. Do you understand? It's just God, Elohim. Now, to use the language of the Catholic mystics, John of the Cross in particular, we would call this the dark night of the soul, where you have to be led to the edge of your resources, what I'd call it to the edge of your false self, and totally let go of your false self. But it's a death. So you're seeing him as growing and changing and becoming, however you want to put it, I think is very good. And most Christians never allowed Jesus to grow. Even though Luke's gospel also says he grew in wisdom, age, and grace. But we pretended, already in the crib at Bethlehem, he knew all the secrets of the world, which is not to be honest or fair to him or the text or the reality of what it must mean to be a God-man, to put the two together. His mind was human and grew like our minds do, not without inspiration, but you and I have inspiration too. So I think you're honing in on something very good there, Kozo, that we do see the final struggle of the death of the ego, the false self, the fear of abandonment, the fear of forsakenness, that all of us sooner or later have to face. And unless we allow Jesus to go through the same journey of faith that you and I have to go through, we're really making a little Cupid doll out of him, which is what a lot of Christians have done. That he's not our pioneer, our exemplar in the way of faith. He's someone we worship instead of follow. And I say that a lot. Jesus never said worship me. He said follow me. What I have done, you also must do. And when Christianity gets that right, I think it'll mature immensely.
Yeah, I love that, because that's his humanness, right? He's half human, half God, and that's his humanness. That a lot of the people who place Jesus as Christ, like you said, when he was born, as sinless, from the point that he's born, I think they miss that humanness. And what they miss when they miss that humanness, Father Richard, in my opinion, is that they miss that we are also half God, half human.
That's right.
And that is the path that we take, is the same path, right?
Yeah. Very good. If we can't honor his humanity, we can't honor our own humanity. When we can't honor his divinity, we can't honor our own divinity. And then the third something is, my God, we got to put the two together, which we haven't done very well up to now. Because we couldn't put it together in Jesus, fully human and fully divine, as the early councils of the church said, at the same time. We didn't know how to put it together in Jesus, so tragedy of tragedies, we didn't know how to put it together in ourselves. And for all practical purposes, most Christians relate to Jesus as simply divine, which is not the message, and then we relate to ourselves as simply human, which is not the message. So we've got a lot of growing up to do yet. Yeah, and I want to say, for anybody who might read or hear this is not edgy theology. I can validate this in pure orthodoxy from the scriptures, from the tradition, from the mystics and saints, but you can't see what you're not told to pay attention to. And we're just saying pay attention to some different things.
Yeah, this is a great way to conclude, Father Richard, because I want to come back to that being divine and human together. That's the non-duality, right?
Very good.
When we realize that non-duality, then we realize Christ consciousness, Buddha nature,
That's right.
divine,
That's right.
The divine. And I just want to thank you so much for all of the breadcrumbs. I think of them as breadcrumbs, and you have so many of them, Father. Not just your 30 books, but your videos up on YouTube, all the inspiration speeches you give, the work that you do, with Center for Action and Contemplation, as they're like breadcrumbs to lead us to to what we truly are. And I really appreciate it. I appreciate you taking the time to do this interview, and thank you so much.
I'm glad to do it, Kozo. You've got a beautiful heart, and you know how to ask the right questions. And when you have the good heart and the good mind, you're going to do a lot of good with this. So I'm happy to hand it on to you. God bless you, brother.